In the previous lesson, we started talking about the top-level files and folders in our React project created by Create React App. And the two core folders here that we have not yet talked about are public and SRC. So let's begin with public. Now, there's quite a few files in here, but the good news is most of them aren't critical. For example, this favicon right here is just a React logo for the title bar. And similarly, these two PNG images are just the React logo, so they are rendered when you load the app in your browser, but they're not obviously critical to your business and to your app, so they're kind of extra files that we don't really care about. This manifest.json file deals with some configuration for progressive web applications. A progressive web application, or a PWA, is an application that is able to deal with the user being offline. So for example, preloading some content that is available in case the user loses their connection. Once again, it's a modern, popular web development idea, but it's not exclusive to React. And thus, this file is helpful if your team wants to build a PWA, but it's not specifically related to React and isn't that important for us to worry about. And similarly, this final file right here of robots.txt simply deals with robots, or in other words, search engine spiders crawling your site for indexing for search engines like Google, right? So once again, this is sort of enabling them to do that. It's not really important to React as a whole, though. So if we eliminate these 5 files just by their relative lack of importance, the only real file that remains in public is index.html, and that's the one that we do actually care about. So this is the HTML file that the user will receive in their browser. You can see, if I scroll down, it's actually pretty short. It's only 43 lines. And a lot of it is just this content in the head element, basic meta tags that's setting up things like the viewport, the theme color, the favicon, things for mobile devices. If you scroll down to the heart of this HTML document, which is the body, you'll notice that all it really has is a single div with an ID of root. There's very little actual HTML. Now remember, that is by design, and that is the point of React. The way that React works is the user is going to receive this bare bones HTML file and a big JavaScript bundle file, and JavaScript is going to launch the React application, and from that point on, React and JavaScript will be responsible for creating new elements on the screen, removing elements from the screen, manipulating and modifying elements of the screen, even giving you the appearance of a full page change when the user navigates. But behind the scenes, there's no new HTML page being loaded from something like a server. Instead, it's just JavaScript giving you that illusion by tearing down various elements on the DOM and then creating and rendering new elements for you to observe. So all the logic for rendering the actual HTML elements is going to be done by React and JavaScript. That's why this file is so bare bones. There's not that much in it. So why do we need a div right here, and why does it have an ID of root? Well, the ID itself is kind of arbitrary. That root value can be whatever we want, but the reason it's often called root is because this div will represent the root, or in other words, the foundation of our eventual React application. Our React application needs some point or position where it's going to mount, where it's going to render, where it's going to initialize. So if you think of the root of a tree, that's the point from which a tree grows. It's the same terminology here. This is the div from which the React application will launch from. It is the root of the application. So how does this all tie into React? Well, let me keep this index.html file open, and then let's explore the source directory. Now in here we have a whole bunch of files, and to be honest, the only one we really want to care about right now is this index.js file right here. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to drag it side by side so we can see the index.html file and the index.js file. All right, now it's not important to understand all of the syntax that we see in these two files, but the only thing worth noting right now is it is here in the index.js file where we are actually mounting the React application. When I use the word mount, I simply mean launch or create. Now you'll notice right here, there's a syntax where we're using the getElementById method. That is a method available on the document object in the browser, and it helps us query for some kind of element on the DOM. In other words, some kind of HTML element that already exists. And you'll notice that what we're searching for is some element with the ID of root, and that is this root right here, this ID of root belonging to this div. So once again, this name can be whatever we want. For example, this could be nonsense, in which case right here, we would search for the element with an ID of nonsense. but obviously root just makes sense because it is the root of the application, right? The point is, here in this file is where we are searching for that element. And this syntax right here, which might look a little bit peculiar to you, and don't worry, we're going to talk more in detail about it in a later lesson. This is the actual syntax right here that renders the React application. The way it actually does that is by rendering a specific component called app. You can see app being rendered right here. And I know the syntax is a little bit confusing because it looks kind of like HTML, but it really isn't. We'll talk more about that. And app is a React component. Now, we don't know yet the technical syntax for a React component, but as you may recall from a few lessons ago, a component is just a chunk of the user interface. It's just a section of the web page. And ultimately, whenever you launch a React application, you're going to have one kind of top-level component that's going to kick everything off. That's going to be the parent component that's going to render, for example, 3 components within it, and those 3 components may render 3 components within themselves, and that relationship can continue all the way down. It's sort of the exact same relationship as we have in our HTML file, where we start everything off with a body tag, and then everything else is just an element that is nested within the body element or a child of the body element. It's sort of the same idea here. App is our top-level React component. App is just a section of the user interface that really represents the entire interface, and it itself will take care of rendering all of the smaller pieces, and that relationship will continue all the way down. It's not super important to understand all of the syntax yet. The only key takeaway here in this lesson is that index.html is what the user will receive, and in the index.js file is where we actually initialize the React application by looking for that single div that is in the HTML document, and from that point forward, launching the React application, in that div. All right, so once again, let's change this back to root, just to reinforce that we are searching for a specific element with an ID of root, and that's what we're using to render this React application. There's a special method called render here on React DOM. We're going to talk more about it later. At the very end of this section, once we become more familiar with the syntax of React and the basics of how it works, we're going to return to these 2 files so we can walk through this code in more detail. And by then, I promise you, you're going to have a better understanding of all the exact steps here and a better understanding of the launch process. But this is a good place to start. These are the 2 core files that matter, the index.html file in public and the index.js file in source. This is the HTML start of the app, and this is the point where React takes over, initializes itself, and starts taking care of all future updates to the DOM, to the user interface. All right, so that's all there is to cover in this lesson, and I will see you in the next one.